Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Occult Perspectives. Your host, Tyler Smith, here. If you are new to this channel, what I do on my YouTube channel is I talk about different esoteric and occult research subjects: ceremonial magic, Freemasonry, Kabbalah, the Tree of Life, the Tree of the Qliphoth, astrotheology, symbology, and much, much more. And while I am a practitioner to a certain degree, I'm still constantly learning, constantly growing. I'm kind of in a stage now where I'm working more on foundations. I am getting back to basics. I've learned a new information a lot recently, which has made me question kind of the direction I'm moving with my practices. So for now, I've just been keeping my meditation practices pretty simple for the most part. So in this video, we are going to get into an interesting book, and we're going to dive deep into the Qliphoth. And as I just mentioned, I'm coming at this from a researcher's perspective, more from a scholarly perspective. While I have never worked consciously with the Qliphoth, I've never gone through Qliphothic initiation. At this point, I've read a lot on it, and in combination with the things that I know about the Kabbalah and the Tree of Life, studying and being involved with Freemasonry, I've learned a lot of tidbits of information along the way. I've had my own unique path, my own unique journey. I know that there have been times in my life where I've gone through Qliphothic types of energy that were key for transforming me from where I was in that current state to learning and eventually being able to grow and evolve. And that's really what the whole magical path is about growing and gaining more knowledge, and also being able to utilize that knowledge in a practical way. Demystifying the occult, if you will. You can study theory like this all day that we're going to get into in this video, but we're going to dive deeper into the theory and philosophy. I think this book goes deeper in explaining the formation of the Tree of Life than any other book I've ever read. Now, Thomas Carlson's Kabbalah, Qliphoth, and Goetic Magic, that's the only other book I've read that really goes into this kind of detail, and it's the closest book I've read to this book. Anyway, the name of the book, it's called the Book of Sitra Achra, and usually I see it spelled differently without a C, so it's Sitra Achra, which is essentially the realm of hell. And if we view hell from a mundane perspective, traditionally what we're taught in Christianity, it's the place of punishment where souls go for eternity or whatever. But if we look at it from a more spiritual, a more practical perspective, hell is really more a state of being. It's like a vibrational frequency. It doesn't really always matter where you physically are. You can be in a state of hell and turmoil, even if everything around you, and everyone else around you is happy and in a state of bliss. You could still be experiencing this internal hell. It's a vibration, and sometimes we have to utilize those darker energies. They can be scary, they can be not always so comfortable, but they help us to face those parts of ourselves that we may not completely understand, because it's the darker aspects, it's the more occulted aspects of ourselves, and we're bringing that to light. We're bringing that forward to be able to analyze and integrate it into our everyday life. So think about hell from more of that perspective, and we each have hell and heaven within us. We are heaven and hell, and we are angels and demons. Those are just different frequencies or different degrees of existence which perform different functions. The negative energy typically being, it's more magnetic. It's like a battery. You've got a positive pole and a negative pole, and it just represents the negative aspect, the negative polarity. It doesn't mean evil, and positive polarity doesn't mean good. They're just different frequencies. They're different vibrations. If you study Hermeticism and all of that, that should make, a lot of sense to you. But this book, it dives really in. We were talking about being able to use this information in a practical way. Don't get so caught up in the stories and just reading so much literature, like, reading like tons and tons of books. Take it slow, actually absorb the information, and then ask yourself, how can I use this in a practical way to empower myself and empower my purpose in life? And that's why I still read quite a bit, but I'm not just trying to read as much as quickly as I can. Like when I first started getting into, the esoteric stuff, I was like getting my hands on anything I could, anything and everything, So now I've come across some deeper documents. This particular document that we're going to be talking about in this video, the Book of Sitra Akra, a grimoire of the dragons of the other side, author is NAA218. This was recommended to me by one of my YouTube subscribers who was on the live stream, and I think, was it Potato was the username. So it was cool that you popped in and told me about this document. You can get this pretty much free online, but it seems like the physical distribution of this copy was pretty limited. Like it's really hard to get a hold of, or it might be really expensive. So if you're not able to do that, you should be able to find it online. So it was really nice for, I'm just going to call you Mr. Potato, because that was your YouTube name at the time. I want to thank you for, getting involved in the conversation and sharing some of your experiences with the Qliphoth and sharing this information, this document, telling me to, check it out and look into it. Also want to give a shout out to The Real Falcone, or The Real Falcone. It's all one word, The Real, Falcone, if you want to check out his YouTube channel. He's got some really cool music on there. I highly recommend you go and check that out. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this document a little bit. It says the following grimoire was the result of almost 2 decades long work with the different points of manifestation belonging to the forces that are within this book. Some of the fundamental forms, some of the outer forms employed within this work can be traced to older sources, such as some of the writings of the adepts of the Golden Dawn. They attribute their research to knowing, figuring out the known names employed to describe the 10 primary Qliphoth and the 12 princes of the Zodiac, which I'm not really familiar too much with the 12 princes of the Zodiac. The 12 princes of the Qliphothic Zodiac, it looks like a couple of them are Baerion, I can't even pronounce that, Adaimeron, Zalimeron. So none of those names really seem too familiar to me. So even that subject in and of itself is that's new to me, but it goes over all that in this document. And I've been reading this very slowly because it's a lot of information to absorb. It's a lot. And the people who wrote this book, they follow the path of what is referred to as the thoughtless light. They talk about a rabbi named Nathan of Gaza, Gaza. They do take some, knowledge from him in order to pay homage to him. But they ultimately follow the other light of thoughtlessness, whose illumination they ever strive for, figuring out their true will. Nathan of Gaza was more of a quote-unquote right-hand pather. He never sided with the dragons of the other side, and instead strived for a union between the two sides of divinity by the assimilation of the Qliphoth into the thoughtful light. Our own approach is dedicated to an opposite cause, with the goal of returning all back to Ein via the route, or root, however you pronounce that, of the thoughtless black light of the Sitcha Akra. So it's all about getting back to the Ein. We've talked about the Ein a lot in this channel, which it's often referred to as no thing, but in fact it's not really nothing. It's not no thing. Although it is that, it's the paradox. It's all potentiality. So it's all creation in total unity. Like it has no split. There's no splits yet. There's no differentiated consciousness or matter yet. It is all one. The primal void, the primal darkness, which is all potentiality, all potential. Way more potential than has yet been manifested in all creation. Anything that ever has been yet manifested is but a sliver of the Ein, as I've described in previous videos. If you're into Kabbalah, I highly recommend that you go and check out my videos on the Ein, A-I-N. So the light of thoughtlessness is what this grimoire strives for. I'm going to go ahead and go to page 12 in this document, which I'm already on. First paragraph is about the true will. Goal is to lead everything back into the Ein, which I just stated. There is a warning that comes with this grimoire. If you're going to read this, if you're going to energetically absorb its teachings, you need to be respectful of these teachings. This isn't just like child's play stuff. This is, and this is why I tread, pretty lightly when it comes to this type of information, and when it comes to these energies. They're so dense, they're so real, it's not a force to be trifled with. Although in the end, it's only going to empower you if you can withstand the energies and then overcome them and integrate all of that within yourself. It's going to lead to your own personal power. Let it be further known that the spirits of this book of the other God demand proper veneration and cultivation, leading to the actual insights and empowerments making possible the employment of their fires of thoughtlessness for the sake of illumination, ascension, and liberation, instead of just the merciless destruction that they have brought and will continue to bring upon those approaching their mysteries without a pure heart inflamed with love for the unbound divinity and a spirit fully aligned to their own good cause, being that of the return of all back into the fullness of emptiness, that Ein we were talking about. Even refers to, starts to talk a little bit. It is difficult to navigate this document on this computer the way it is set up. With these few words, we welcome and bless those that are of the Holy Serpent's bloodline and who share with the Nachashel, both spirit and will, and hope that they, through the mysteries revealed and concealed within this grimoire, can traverse the path of fire illuminated by the black light, and reach the points of transcendence which shall unite us all in spirit within the great 11-headed dragon before the final step leading back to the nullification. We have some Kabbalistic numbers here. 11 equals 0 minus 1 equals 0. You have the pillars 11 dot, the gateway, and 1 minus 1 equals 0, goes back to the ein, and reabsorption of all back into ein. And this whole serpent bloodline thing, the whole kind of reptilian energy, has a lot of negative connotation in today's world. But this dragon, this primal beast, this energy, it's very important to understand that we all have it, and how to integrate it, and how to use it in a constructive way rather than a destructive way. But we also know that destruction is just as important as, constructiveness sometimes. Life is a balance of creation and destruction. The destruction element is just as important, destroying and breaking down the things that are artificial in nature or are just not in alignment with our true will, our highest self. Even especially in today's world, with AI and technologies such as that, you see the AI becoming more human than the humans. Humans are more robotic and they're more limited in their functionings and thinkings than even the AI are. They can actually sit there and hold an intelligent conversation with you. Most humans their functions are limited, the way they can think is limited because they've been programmed so heavily and they've accepted that they become artificial. So that's when it becomes necessary for this energy or this influence of destruction to come in and destroy what is false, so that the new or the genuine or the real world can be born from that. So approaching all of this with respect. So let's get into it. Chapter 1, the Citra Akra and the Serpents of the Thoughtless Light. So in the beginning was Ein, the nothingness of divinity, and its fullness of emptiness. And I'm also going to try and draw and map out some of this on a piece of paper, because there's so many steps of creation that go into the process after the split from Ein. We're going to get into that. The Ein, as the paradox says, it's the fullness of emptiness. It's unbound non-being and the eternal nihility of holiness. This Ein was and remains the void of the supreme bliss of unlimited and unrestricted potential, realized by not coming into being and by remaining unknown and indistinctive. So it is very occult, and its influence continues. Remember, as we've talked about in videos before, there was a part of the Ein, or the original first separation of creation, there was a part that did not want to separate from the Ein in the very beginning of creation, and then there was the half that wanted to expand. It wanted to further limit itself to try and understand itself. So we're going to get into that. And I also want to mention, we see this, how do we see this manifested on an everyday, day-to-day reality? If you look at the world around you, everyone is so lost and so distracted that they're always trying to project outwards. They're always trying to find the next thing to distract them, and they're always just manifesting physical things. Abundance, but abundance that's not in an alignment with their highest self. So what we see is a world that's just over encumbered right now. And that's where the limiting factor comes in, when it's the whole essence of Lucifer, order out of chaos kind of deal. He's an agent of chaos. It's a chaos energy, dark in nature, dark feminine energy, which is absorbs. But yeah, you need that limiting factor, that cutting down factor sometimes, because reality just wants to expand and expand and expand and expand and expand so much without knowing itself, without learning itself. And then by the time it's expanded, it's just so chaotic that it in no way reflects what it originally was. It's so separated from source that And that's what we're seeing in the world today, is everything is so separated from source, and it keeps wanting to expand in its false ego. I'll call it the false ego. It's the ego that's not in alignment with the highest self. And it really just creates so much artificiality. And really, it's all going to have to come back. It's all going to have to come back to the source, come back to its primal nature, and stop distracting itself at some point. This ever expanding, when does the retraction start? So, I don't know, the world is just a crazy place, and what people think is fun to them and joyful, I guess your spirit, especially, it's good to have that childlike wonder to enjoy and experience things, but you start to get to a certain point in your spiritual development, especially if you practice magic and stuff, where you just start to see the futility of it all. People really expending their whole lives and wasting energy and wasting time, precious time. We look at the symbol of like the hourglass. The sands are always falling. Gosh, there's little bugs coming through the window. Still have the ACs in the window, so there's like a little crack that they can get in through. So anyway, but yeah, just the human race just needs to calm down. Take it down a notch. Stop running away from the self. Stop running away from the self and look inwards. Look within and learn about yourself and know thyself truly, rather than always having to be expansive. Construction, making things operatively, it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's not saying it's bad. It's just the way in which it's done is not in reflection with the true self or the higher self. So the more we can do that, the better. So the Ein splits to the Ein Sof. That's the first step. So I'm going to draw another ring here around this original circle. And I'll just call it the Ein Sof. And Ein is the zeroth, immediately preceding first in the series. So it's the zero. And if we look at the zero, what is the zero? It's a circle. It's continuity. It's never ending. So the circle really, in its purest essence represents the Ein. There is no division. It is one. So this Ein to the Ein Sof, this is the first separation. In a desire to understand its unlimitedness. It's so funny. It's like it has to... It's everything. It's everything, but it's still wanting to separate itself to understand itself, which there is beauty in separation for the sake of unity. But then there's also a point where the creation gets too far. We're going to get into that. A split is created here. Two halves, one side seeking to further the Sof, the Ein Sof, the other striving to uphold its Ein, striving to uphold that original unity, that original totality. The Ein Sof started to struggle with the thoughtlessness within it. So there is the first struggle. And it's funny because really this is all a cosmic play. This is all really Source experiencing and playing with itself, essentially, to know itself. It's so strange and so like paradoxical in a way. Within this state of Ein Sof, hold on just a second. From the primal state of zeroth chaos with no beginning or end fell a fraction of divine possibility down towards limit. It was the fall, the first fall, it seems like. Establishing itself is the Ein Sof. meaning non-limited, but carrying within itself the very essence of that addition of limit caused by separation. So you see, we've talked about this before. A prerequisite for creation or physical manifestation of any kind, this is before actual physical dense objects, of course, but it's still limiting itself from that original state. But separation and those types of things are prerequisites for creation. So it carried within itself the very essence of that addition of limit caused by separation, for by the adding to nothingness less was attained and not more. So there's the paradox again. By adding more, you're actually taking away from the totality of the primal state. It's very profound. And we're going back to the beginning of creation. I know Madame Blavatsky, I've read some of the Secret Doctrine. She talks about the different states of creation, but this is going back to that primal beginning. And we talked about that a little bit in my Madame Blavatsky videos too. This is coming at it from more of, I guess, quote unquote, left-hand path. But, as I've said many, many times, it's all one. It's all one tree, even though it's the tree of life and the tree of the Klapoth. Everything is one, separated into different, it becomes separated into different units though, but it's all connected and it's all important to understand. Within the state of Ein Sof, divinity was restricted by knowing that it was unlimited and thus wanted to know limits. It had to know itself by creating limits or know its own limits. But as this will started to manifest, so did its opposite within that state of all that could be. Let me read again. Thus wanted to know limits, but as this will started to manifest to know its limitedness, so did the opposite within that state of all that could be, and thus two halves were becoming, one side seeking to further the Sof, while the other side strived to uphold its Ein. So I've got two circles I've drawn here, and one half of the circle is the Ein Sof, and then the other half, this is just a visual representation for me as I'm going through this to kind of help me understand it even more. And then the other side of this Ein Sof emanation is the other, quote, other side. That's why it's the dragons of the other side, which is striving to uphold its original unity. One aspect of the Ein Sof was thoughtful of its own limiting impulse and its separation from nothingness, while its other side was thoughtless and unwilling to know any limit for the sake of avoiding further restriction caused by separation from its primal state of unlimited non-being. Let me read that again. One aspect of the Ein Sof was thoughtful of its own limiting impulse and its separation from nothingness. So thoughtful light. But darker light, as we know, dark light, ultraviolet light, these are lights of a higher spectrum. It appears dark because we cannot yet perceive it. But when that light is understood and can be comprehended, it's the dark light. It's the thoughtless light. It's really beyond even logical explanation or understanding. It almost, and that's where you get in when you're working with meditation and you're getting into those states. That's where you start to understand. You can start to understand these concepts a little bit better through actual integration and knowing. So one aspect of the Ein Sof was thoughtful of its own limiting impulses and its separation from nothingness, while its other side was the thoughtless light. That's the light that's striving to uphold its original Ein, original unity. Its other side was thoughtless and unwilling to know any limit for the sake of avoiding further restriction caused by separation from its primal state of unlimited non-being. So when we get back into that state of the Ein, we truly, there's no limit. That's unlimitedness. In this state outside of the nothingness, the Ein Sof was all-embracing and absolute, leaving no space between the conflicting it left no space between the conflicting thoughtfulness and thoughtlessness within it. So it's leaving no space, causing a foundation for inner struggle and turmoil. So the Ein Sof starts to leave no space between the conflicting thoughtfulness and thoughtlessness within it. And this caused a foundation for inner struggle and turmoil. So these two sides are conflicting, the Ein Sof not wanting to leave any space for the half that wanted to uphold Ein. As two conflicting sides of the one existing totality, let me go ahead and read my notes for this page. So this is page 14 of the document that we're on now. Not getting very far, just really wanting to cover the essence of what this, what these teachings mean, rather than just jumping into it so deep from the get-go, because it starts to get really kind of complicated, but it's not complicated. It all really makes sense. But using Kabbalistic and Kabbalistic terminology to really explain these concepts on a deeper level. So page 14, the Ein to the Ein Sof. I'm sorry, I'm on page 15 now. The idea in the top paragraph further brings to mind Thamael, so probably talking about the twin serpents there. Let's see. As two conflicting sides of the one existing totality, they limited each other as one sought to expand, one sought expansion, and knowing by self-imposed restriction and separation from its own absolute source, while the other was thoughtless of all but its own will for absorption back into the divine mystery of the fullness of nothingness. So the thoughtless is thoughtless of all but its own will for absorption back into the Ein. And there we see the energies of, positive expansion and negative, which is absorption, magnetic. And on one level, I guess, yes, this battle between the two sides, it could be, viewed as similar in a way to Thamael. You've got Satan and Moloch, and through the opposition, you reach higher states of being. It's through the pushing of each side, it pushes experience into a point where it comes to a unification at some point, but it's the resistance that gets you there. It's the resistance. It's like you learn through resistance, you gain higher understanding of yourself, but then there's a reconciliation at some point. And with Thamael, Satan's the destroyer of the old world, while Moloch is the being that opens up the portal to the new world. Which is really, and we'll get into it, the destruction of the old world would be this world of thoughtfulness that wants to ever expand And it's trying to know itself through limits. So it's not really that one side is like evil or one side is good. But in this ever expandingness, as you'll see, we'll get into it a little bit, there starts to become, a problem. But all of this is just experience anyway. It's the divine, like, further knowing itself. One side expansive, one absorbing, to know itself further, the one half of the Ein Sof continues to limit. As the right and left sides of the Ein Sof, they thus became. So now you have the Ein Sof split in two. So I've kind of done, this is step 2, and it's the Ein Sof, and it's split into 2 sides. Thoughtful side, thoughtless side. As the right and left sides of the Ein Sof, they thus became, and as the right and thoughtful aspect could not in their present state of no limit know its own thoughts. Let me read that again. So these 2 sides of the Ein Sof, they became split, and as the right and thoughtful aspect could not in their present state of no limit know its own thoughts by manifesting them outside of the condition that it and its other side filled up fully, it knew that the way to achieve its goals was the further limiting of itself and the separation from that conflicting side. So you have the Ein that is conflicting with the thoughtful light and trying to withdraw back into the Ein. And the only way that this Ein Sof is going to be able to continue its limiting factors, its limiting quote unquote creation to understand itself, it's going to have to separate from this conflicting side of its own Ein Sof. Thus, the thoughtful side of Ein Sof, for the sake of the ordering and manifesting of its thoughts, caused itself to contract and pushed away that other side. So now you have these 2 sides which are split. It's split into 2 separate pieces. So it's manifesting the thoughtful side of Ein Sof, for the sake of the ordering and manifesting of its thoughts, caused itself to contract and pushed away that other side that did not take part in its contraction further down into the vacuous Tahiru, void space that was created between them. So Tahiru, we're going to hear that word again and again in this document, means basically just means void space, I believe. Yep, a void space is created. Seems like between these 2 sides. And this whole idea of having to order, order has its place. There's a time where chaos needs to come to order and where order needs to become chaotic. Having too much order, being too wrapped up about having everything perfect and in place, this is important. I stress this a lot because I see how sloppy and messy the world is and how, kind of just, people are. There has to be a point where you embrace chaos too, and you have to just let the universe do its thing, learn to let go, learn to be more receptive. That's that whole female, feminine, the feminine energy, it's what that represents. So this Tahiru is created. So the void, an empty primordial space that was so produced between the two sides. So you've got this void in between them, Tehiru, Tehiru. This void and empty primordial space that was so produced between the two sides came thus into being by the retraction of the thoughtful side into its own thoughts of creation. While the thoughtless side became further removed from where it sought to return in fullness, and thus became filled with thoughts of opposition towards the side, causing the expansion of its fallen separation. Let me read some of my notes that I have for this page. To be able to manifest the, quote, light side, Ein Sof, or limitless light, this light penetrated into the void that was created. So, and that's why I read this so slowly and really try to process what it's saying. Because, even as I'm reading this document, I still have to read it a couple times to really, understand. The void and empty primordial space that was so produced between the two sides came thus into being by the retraction of the thoughtful side into its own thoughts of creation. So the Ein Sof is retracting back into its own, we'll call it artificial or synthetic creation, because it's limiting the original essence. But the thoughtless side becomes further removed from where it sought to return in fullness because of this void space that's been created, and it gets angry, for lack of a better term. We're talking about grand concepts here. This is way beyond like the physical realm. So these concepts can be kind of hard and really theoretical to try and understand. So we just have to do the best with the terminology and the consciousness that we have right here, right now. The thoughtless side became further removed from where it sought to return in fullness in its Ein, and thus became filled with thoughts of opposition towards the side that was causing the expansion of its fallen separation. So it's separated. This one side, the thoughtful light, is wanting to cause expansion of this fallen side. It's wanting to expand. And then the thoughtless light is being, in essence, kind of dragged along here, it seems. It gets angry. It does not want to. So it has to oppose this thoughtful light in order to get back to the Ein, the original essence. In order to erect the manifestation of its thoughts, and the retracted side became as a light. The Ein Sof, or. So this Ein Sof, which is, as we just said, was retracting itself back into. I'm not even going to continue trying to draw this stuff, because even as I'm drawing it out, it just looks kind of dumb. I mean, I guess if I were a better artist or like graphic designer or something, it would be kind of cool to like draw it out. But even then, it's only like the drawings are just symbols of a deeper concept that you're really trying to understand in human terms. In order to erect the manifestation of its thoughts, the retracted side became as a light. So to erect this, to continue erecting and manifesting the thoughtful light, the retracted side turned into a light, as that's retracting on itself, and the Ein Sof, or called the limitless light, is produced. So that's the third veil of the outer, the outer sphere on the tree of life. You have the Ein Sof, or the Ein Sof, and the Ein Sof, or. The Ein, the no thing, the Ein Sof, the limitless all, which is kind of misleading, as we've just discussed all this, and then the limitless light. Let me see if I have my chart around here anywhere. So up here above Kether, Ein, and you can pause that if you need to, Ein Sof and the Ein Sof Or. Here it says infinite light, but limitless light. So, yep. Often those layers, I believe they're referred to as the Empyrean heaven, collectively.